we had a customer, a midstream company, that had many tanks, and they were filled with gasoline, and they were wanting to install fire suppression systems. And so they had made an attempt to weld brackets onto the side of this tank with gasoline in those tanks. And so they would adjust the liquid level of the gasoline in the tank to be above where they were welding. And API has a procedure for ensuring safety, so you can actually weld on gasoline if you're 3 feet below the vapor space. But there were problems with that. One is that the welders were working from a man lift, and it was windy, and so the man lift's moving while they're trying to lay a nice bead on a vertical surface. And arc welding works quite well on a flat surface, but a vertical surface, a skilled welder can still do a good job, but throw into it that their basket, the man lift basket that they're standing in, is moving around, and they were unable to perform a good quality weld. And so when it came time for a weld inspection, they failed the welds. The welds failed the inspection. So they had to remove those brackets and try again. And so that's a weather condition that can make it difficult. And vertical surfaces make it more difficult as well, though not impossible. There's lots of welds performed on vertical surfaces. But it's certainly aggravates the situation for typical fusion welding processes. And to add to that, these tanks had internal liners. And so the heat generated from arc welding tends to be a problem for coatings, both internal and external. So that liner inside, they had to be very careful with the amount of heat they generated during the arc welding process. And the liquid on the backside helped that condition or that situation. But the external coating, the paint on the side of the tank, gets cooked, it gets burned. And so now they're looking at an additional expense on the job to blast those areas where the paint was burnt, and now they have to repaint the side of the tank. With the forge bonding process, that's not required. The forge bonding process doesn't generate enough heat to damage the coatings. There's no problem with the basket of the man lift moving because the process is fully automated. The machine is set up on the shell of the tank in this situation, which, by the way, we ended up installing brackets on these tanks to save the customer money, and we actually performed the work faster than if they had arc welded these brackets. So our machine is attached to the side of the tank, technician pushes a button, and 3 seconds later or several seconds later, the bond is complete. So it's a very rapid process. It's fully automated. It takes the human factor out of it, because the fusion welding, you're relying on the skill of the arc welder, where with an automatic welding process, as long as it's set up properly by the weld operator, it's very easy to get a repeatable bond each and every time without the concern for the welding operator having a steady hand and an amount of skill. To further add to that, as far as environmental conditions, generally our customer doesn't want anybody performing work, whether it be arc welding or forge bonding or any other type of work, if it's raining. So we're all faced with rain out days, but if there's moisture on the surface, it's easy to clean that up before we get started. Hot and cold have very little effect on the forge bonding process. So temperature is not a big issue. We've performed work on the roofs of tanks well below 25 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's really no adjustment to the process. If the temperatures get really high, say on hot insulated piping, we've performed work on piping over 700 degrees Fahrenheit, and we actually shorten the bond time because the metal is preheated. But when we're working on high temperature piping, typically that piping has been heat treated before it's put in service, and arc welding would typically take the heat treating out of that piping. And so it's a very expensive process, or it's considerably expensive, I should say, to wrap that pipe with a heat treating oven and to restore the heat treating on that pipe. Well, forge bonding does not create enough elevated or thermal energy to remove the heat treating from the piping. So that process, unnecessary expense is eliminated. So so the forge bonding process is very resilient to different weather and environmental conditions.